Hello, and welcome to this Australia-New Zealand Women's Declaration International webinar for March 2025. My name is Janet Fraser, coming to you from Gundarra, west of Sydney. I'm the convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. Tonight I have Anna Kerr and Bronwyn Williams from the Feminist Legal Clinic doing tech and moral support with me. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, but particularly the women of this continent. We have three speakers tonight, whom I'll introduce in turn. A reminder that the presentation is recorded and question time is not. When we end for question time, I'd appreciate it if women use the Q&A box for written questions so I don't lose them in the chat. If you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand icon and I will keep a running list of the order in which I see you appear. And now to introduce our excellent speakers. Andrea Marion is appearing tonight for the first time on WDI. She operates TERFworks, which is a women supporting women project in which she designs and creates feminist-based leadlight panels and other TERF media that are donated to various feminist groups for fundraising. Andrea is a carpenter and builder by trade and has bachelor degrees, plural, in architecture, building management and urban design, and a master's degree in town and regional planning. She's been an active feminist for well over 40 years and recently designed and donated the Melbourne Let Women Speak banner for Kelly J. Keane, which went viral on social media and is still doing the rounds. Andrea's latest project is a large leadlight panel, 2 metres in length, depicting various iconic moments in Andrea's feminist learnings. Preferring a reclusive lifestyle with her dogs, she jokingly reflects upon the women's collective mind melds and groupthink of the 80s almost stole my will to live, let alone my desire to be creative. So nowadays, Andrea prefers mainly to hover around the group perimeters, where she devises creative ways to support feminist groups fighting the good fight. Like many TERFs, Andrea had no idea that she would see her 66-year-old self and her TERFy sisters on the front line again, yet here she is. Dr. Susan Hawthorne is a writer, researcher, publisher, occasional academic, and the convener of the Coalition of Activist Lesbians, COAL. She joined the Women's Liberation Movement in 1973 and for several years was a volunteer at Melbourne's Rape Crisis Centre. She has been doing research on lesbians who have been tortured and lesbian refugees. She is the author, is affecting the sexist rights of women and girls. In 2023, Feminist Legal Clinic was granted special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. Welcome aboard, everyone. So I would like to hand over to Andrea, if you would like to get ready to share your screen, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm not a big talker, but I'm going to have to do a bit of it, I guess. But look, I came back to lead lighting after all of the rest of my life, only in the last, I guess, 12, 14 months. And I had to have major surgery on my back and I couldn't bend over and I couldn't reach up. And this was something that I used to do long ago. And so I thought I needed a project while I recovered. And so I had recently moved house and there was one piece of lead light that I remember teaching my mother and doing lead light, and she made this piece and it smashed while I moved house. Anyway, I thought I would repair that. And that's where it all started. And so my mother's truly passed away now, but that little white dove in the picture there is the only remaining piece of a very large circle. And so I thought that I would repair that, but it turned into a massive project. It's a little bit cumbersome, I know, to get the drift, but begin at the beginning and go on until you come to the end and then stop was pretty much the motto. And so from a sort of a square foot piece of glass remaining of this lead light, I've now built a 2 metre by 1300 mil lead light depicting, I guess, the feminist influences on me. I'm a born and bred Melbourne girl. and have been around for a very long time. And while I was thinking of my mum and that small piece of Dove lead light glass remaining, I just went into I guess a mindset about all of the women that have influenced me throughout my years. And so this is the project, and that's hence it's called Influence. I didn't have a really big major plan. I made it piece by piece and item by item, but I'll sort of skip through it. There's little feminists. These were feisty little feminists, these ones, to put together. They were just incredibly hard to do. And mind you, I hadn't done lead lighting for well over 35 years. So, you know, my fingers are bleeding putting all this together. These are just a couple of the sort of pieces as it was built. Is obviously the feminist fist and symbol. And this is a bit more to it. Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch. Whoop, don't do that. The Female Eunuch, and also Rosie the Riveter. You'll see up in the right-hand corner the lesbian symbol is starting to be built there, and also the white sash above the Rosie Riveter, which was going to depict the monster petition of Victorian women, the 30,000 signatures acquired to get the petition to Parliament to give women the vote in Victoria. So that was part of it. This is on a sort of a side picture to give you a bit of an overview how it was built. And so the little feminists are down, suffragettes are down in the corner, and the white ribbon monster petition, and next to the suffragettes is a bit of a display of the Women's Land Army posters that a lot of the women, you know, went to factories and did farm work to support the men at work, at war, I should say. So this was, it was just building a whole lot of elements, and as I was going down the rabbit hole, I guess, that, you know, I was learning more and more and more, but other pieces like, of course, the Rosie the Riveter, it was iconic to me, and I've always loved Rosie, and I'm a die-hard Germaine Greer fan. So, of course, the Female Eunuch was the really influential in my very young days. So, of course, that front cover, the graphic of that front cover had to go in. This piece here is, I had to go and take a short course on cathedral glass painting, which is baking the glass like you see in churches. It's really very complex. And this piece here is a 1 shilling, which is one of the ones that I took a photocopy of that I wear around my neck. And this is to represent the Willing Shilling appeal, which was held in Victoria by Constance Stone and a few other women that I'll introduce a bit later. And they asked every woman in Victoria to donate shillings and they put it together and bought the first women's and children's hospital in Victoria. And it was donated for by every woman and person that donated one of these shillings. So this was around 1893 to 1899. So it was sort of all of those elements, and you'll see right in the middle of the screen there next to Rosie, that little building there was sort of, I was trying to get a ghost effect because that was the tiny little, I think it was the governess old building. There's only one picture that I could find in my research of it, and I sort of tried to give it a bit of a ghost look, like I said, and that round circle is where the shilling now lies when you'll see a picture of the finished lead light. Yeah, so I actually really didn't know that part. So it was sort of this was down the rabbit hole thing. The next, I guess, discovery was, you know, like while I was doing all of this, and as you can see, it was all built in separate pieces, and then I had to sort of somehow build it together and join it up. And so I was thinking, and I've known a lot of women in my day, and I've, hung around with a lot of women and protested a lot of women with a lot of women. We all have. And I just started to think, and I obviously could build a lead light with every woman's name that has, ever contributed to our plight over the years, but that wasn't possible. So I had to build a few in, and here's a few of the names that there's hundreds of them, that all of these panels were cut and then little stencils, little stickers for their names, and then acid washed. And so every one of those little panels were made individually, and the little stickers washed off and everything washed off, and hence it's etched like it is. Now they sort of build part of the lead light at the base. Oh, that's just a flick back to the feisty little suffragettes. Now the corners, the grey names were obviously the English women, but the glass panel with the women's names on it depict the women that were basically the suffragettes of Melbourne and Victoria, and I'll show you them in a minute. Now with the lead light, it has 3D elements. I haven't welded the frame up and finished it as yet, and when I do, all of those elements will come together. Now, this is a bit of a shot of them just placed in there. I scrounged these off eBay and looked for them, and these are the original coins of that year, printed by the suffragettes in London for obviously to put around as propaganda, which is a great idea. And the little purse, obviously, reflective of the times, the fashion of the era. There's the peace dove and that dove that I first talked about, and the Sound Women's Peace Camp, 1984. This is a backward view of this, and I've now built that lesbian flag corner up a bit from there. And I've built around, obviously, the female eunuch and the front cover of the female eunuch. And this is the top of the sort of brick wall where, my tribute to local women and overseas women has come about. So there's a few recent women there, like Sel Grover. I don't ever remember her in the 70s and 80s battling, but she's given it one hell of a bashing now, isn't she? And there's Renata Klein's name there, Susan, so you'll be happy about that. So there is pretty much almost complete, as you can see, that the names are built like sort of a stone wall, a brick wall, that I've built my experience on, really, and knowing these women, and reading about them and knowing what they've done at a local level and also an international level, of course. So, they sort of build up from the bottom. The Constance Stone, i.e. the first Vic Women's and Children's Hospital and first doctor in Victoria, woman doctor, is down the bottom. And then they sort of go from there. There's Zelda DiPrano, Pat Longmore, who ran the only women's hotel in Richmond, Victoria. Her name's there. Jan Gladys, or Jan Testro, a very good friend of mine, and there's a few other sort of tributes to people there, women there, I should say. That's just one angle of pretty much the finished item. You'll see right over in the sort of far corner, there's a bit of a space left. I was hoping to probably go back to class and do a sort of a photographic representation of Germaine Greer as well. So there's a bit of a blank corner there. It's clear glass, and that'll be maybe replaced if I can get to do that. But whilst I was doing this, you'll see right in the smack bang middle of the whole lead light, there's the feminist fist there. Well, and then it got me to thinking that I should make things to, for my TERFy sisters, to support them in their plight and their groups. I'm not a groupie sort of person. So even though I do go to lots of group things, I don't belong to any of them per se. Although, yeah. Anyway, I'm part of AUS, so that's probably a good thing. But got off track a bit. But the feminist fist there in the middle was pretty much the impetus to do the 10 panels that I've made, and to date I've donated 7 of those panels to feminist groups, and have given one away to Moira Deeming. And basically it's to, you know, try and raise funds, which it always does, which I'm really chuffed about. I'm really thrilled that women are wanting one of these pieces, you know, that I make. So this was this. Whoop, I shouldn't do that with the mouse. It drives me crazy when people do that. So that piece there was sort of the impetus. So that's the lead light. Up the top there, there's a saying about bitch, crone, TERF, blah, 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 you know, and the J.K. Rowling saying about times change, but women hate is eternal. I thought that was quite fitting in this sort of time. And also the women, adult, human, female. The most recent, I guess, depiction, graphic introduction of what's going on in nowadays. So yeah, so that is it, I think. There's a picture of me. This was only taken a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, by a couple of women that came to visit, which I was a bit thrilled about because I haven't got a photo of that. So yeah, so that's the finished piece. These are just a few other pieces that I've sent to women that I didn't quite get to the IWD Brisbane conference, like all of us. And so I sent that to the woman that I was going to stay with. And these are just a few other pieces. Just quickly go through those. They're just little sun catchers that I've given away. And this is, I am an admin for the Gender Critical Lesbian Facebook site. And so that's one of the glass pieces that I made and did a graphic for that site. Yeah, so like I said, that the I had made quite a few other quite a few panels, like I said, 7 of them. So I'll just quickly go through those, and they've gone to various organizations that have auctioned them off, raffled them off per se. All right, so I'll just go through these and hope I'm not boring you. And part of TERFworks, and this is the first one that I made, and they have quotes with women's sayings on them. That one's from Maya Angelou. So anyway, I mean, that was the first one, and lucky duck, Anna Mac got this one. This one actually arose from, remember the feminist fist and the larger lead light? Well, that was the first feminist fist in the larger lead light, but it was too big for that position. If I wanted to put all of that other stuff that was going on in my head down on glass. So that one had to go. And so this really was the inspiration of the start of these panels. So that was the first one. This one went to AUS. I am a feminist. This one went to IWD Brisbane. And I think a Victorian one. This is the Susan B. Anthony saying, no self-respecting women should wish or work for the success of a party that denies her sex. Womanhood. That one went to Moira Deeming because I thought Moira Deeming had been so damn courageous. And I was in, you know, I just was really wanting to say that there were a lot of women behind her that, you know, weren't necessarily known about, but we wanted to know that, I wanted to let her know that we were there. Another one, and this one is actually up for grabs if a fitting group would want a donation. So let me know. This one, I love this one. This is probably one of my favourite ones. But anyway, that one has won by a woman at a lesbian camping event. Another one up for grabs. This one, I forget who got this. It's another version of the Maya Angelou saying. This one, I really like the sort of various languages that woman has said, and this is also acid washed. So every one of these panels are made separately, and put stickers on and then put in acid, had acid wash all over them, and then left for a particular time. And believe me, they don't always go right. You know, the corners turn up and things like that. There's a bit of failure with these things. So, you know, that every one of those panels with etching on would have taken me probably 15 to 18 hours a piece, let alone putting it together and the lead light. So, yeah. So there's a bit of work in it, but I love doing it, and I really like that I can do something that you know, stimulate some money. And actually, you know, I mean, women get really sick of, can you donate, can you donate, can you donate? And we all do it, and we give as much as we can all the time, and we all appreciate it, but we all know it's a drag. So I was really hoping that, you know, that women would appreciate actually getting something for it, which I'm very happy about, you know. And this is the I think this one's up for grabs too. I'm just looking that way because it's on my hanging in my window. And so this is the Pankhurst saying, remember the dignity of your womanhood. Do not appeal, do not beg, do not grovel, take courage, join hands, stand beside us, which is the language of the day, fight with us. I like that one too. So, and this is just a bit of a compilation of the posters that I put out that when we did the raffles for various women's groups. And that's it, really. So, yeah, hope you like that. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. What amazing work. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to come on and speak. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to hand over to Susan. Susan Hawthorne, take it away.
My talk today is called Asking Questions About Lesbians, and it was given last week at the forum in New York, online, but the online version. Never mind, we get a chance to do it again. So today I'm speaking to you from Juru country in far north Queensland, where I live and work, and I respectfully acknowledge their custodianship of the land's waterways. I also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. I'm beginning my talk today with some quotations from lesbians who've been subjected to violence, including corrective rape, torture, forced pregnancy and forced marriage, imprisonment, and the ultimate punishment, murder. I honour all these lesbians for their strength, for their resistance, and for their love for lesbians. And I raise questions on behalf of them and all lesbians. So the research that this is based on is what I've been doing since 2003. And you can read more about it in Vortex, The Crisis of Patriarchy, and also I book from last year, Lesbian Politics, Culture, Existence, which is a whole stack of essays written over 50 years. So now to the words of lesbians. In Sierra Leone, on 29 September 2004, Fanny Ann Eddy was found dead after being repeatedly raped. She had testified at the UN Commission on Human Rights in 2004, just a few months before her death. She wrote, "Silence creates vulnerability. You, members of the Commission on Human Rights, can break the silence. You can acknowledge that we exist throughout Africa and on every continent, and that human rights violations based on sexual orientation or gender identity are committed every day. You can help us combat those violations and achieve our full rights and freedoms in every society, including my beloved Sierra Leone. She had been working in the offices of the Sierra Leone Lesbian and Gay Association, which she founded, on the day that she was murdered. My questions are, what action was taken by the UN Commission of Human Rights then, and what action is being taken now? Human rights commissions seem to have a very bad record. I ask, would we try to be horrified about what has happened to lesbians? In 1976, under the Pinochet regime in Chile, Consuelo Rivera Fuentes was tortured and later fled to England as a refugee. She writes in a co-authored piece with her partner in 2001, she writes this: "No training session prepared me for this intense pain, my pain, the one I did not choose. All this alienation, this empty vacuum, my body, my mind, my pain. This is not happening. I am a little speck in the universe. Which universe? The world is not anymore. I am disintegrating, bit by bit, yell by yell, electrode by electrode. The pain, all this pain here and there, down there in my vagina, the agony. Where am I? Where is my I?" Consuelo asks, where is my I after her experience of torture? She is also asking, where is my lesbian I? Where is the centrality of the experiences of lesbians recorded and recognised? Where is the recognition that the violation of lesbians goes on day after day and no one speaks of it? An unnamed lesbian refugee from Iran says of her experience, in Kashan, they tied me to a car and pulled me across the ground. What should I say? Who should I say it to? Why doesn't anyone listen to us? Where is this human rights? An unnamed Peruvian lesbian says, when I speak of my right to my own culture and language as an Indigenous woman, everyone agrees to my self-determination. But when I speak of my other identity, my lesbian identity, my right to love, to determine my own sexuality, no one wants to listen. In Zimbabwe, in the mid-1980s, Tina Machida says, they locked me in a room and brought him every day to rape me, so I would fall pregnant and force me to marry him. They did this to me until I was pregnant. In my book Vortex, The Crisis of Patriarchy, I also document the murders of lesbians in South Africa, yet sexual orientation is a protected characteristic in the South African Constitution, as well as murders of lesbians in the US, including the murders of 2 lesbians and their son by transgender advocate Dana Rivers in 2016. So what are the elements that go together to make it so difficult to have successful campaigns on behalf of lesbians? So this is a list of features that I've noticed. When colonisers conquer a land, their first reports back to empire usually contain something along the lines of, the natives possess no culture. They excuse themselves for conquering and dispossessing others. In the same way, lesbians are said to have no culture. The denial of lesbian existence, which is a way of breaking the spirit. The destruction of lesbian knowledge and culture. Heterosexuality is imposed. Isolation, a particular problem for young lesbians, lesbians with a disability, and old lesbians. There's also the criminalisation of lesbians, punishment, including the death penalty, long imprisonment, and torture, including rape, and humiliating sexual violence, and things like being pushed off the top of buildings till their death. Murder, honour killings, and persistent rape, so the lesbian becomes pregnant against her will, and corrective rape by gangs of young men, prison guards, and families. Treatment as second-class citizens, direct or indirect discrimination. Government failure to recognise lesbians in law as a distinct group subjected to discrimination. Inferior medical services, such as partners not recognised as next of kin. If a lesbian manages to bring a case against the perpetrator, there is a high chance she'll be forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. This results in the crime being made invisible as a crime against a lesbian, and in that way, it doesn't exist. Lesbians are shamed and expected to be either heterosexual or, if not, to transition and appear as masculine. Shame creates isolation. Ostracism can result in bullying, taunts, and beatings. It creates what Indian writer Maya Sharma calls a discourse of catastrophe. Lesbians are also declared mad. Lesbians who resist publicly are attacked both online and in real life. If a lesbian becomes famous, she'll be remembered either for her sexuality, in which case her achievements remain hidden, or her sexuality will be hidden and her achievements remembered. These are the result of shame and make documenting lesbian history very difficult. Reading through that, it makes me realise it's amazing we keep going. Is it any wonder then that lesbian refugees have to travel such a hard path gaining refugee status? In 1987, 11 years after she'd been released from prison and Chile was apparently now under democratic rule, a trap was set for Consuelo Rivera Fuentes, who I talked about earlier. A policeman came to her workplace at the British Commissariat and told her she should come to police headquarters with him after convincing her she had nothing to fear. He took her through the building where she had been tortured and into a room where an officer sat at a table. The officer wanted her to have sex with his female lover. Consuelo realised this was a trap and she agreed to meet him in 2 weeks. Consuelo left Chile 5 days later. She had already planned to fly to the UK and was enrolled in a women's studies course there. It just shows how important women's studies is. And Nigerian activist Adaronke Apata was not so lucky. It took her 13 years to gain asylum in the UK. One of the sticking points, according to Theresa May, who headed the Home Office at the time, was that Adaronke was pretending to be a lesbian to gain asylum. She was put in solitary confinement for a week in Yarlswood Immigration Removal Centre in 2012. The accusation of pretense was because she was the mother of a child, and the assumption was, therefore, she must be heterosexual. As we know, there are many lesbians who are mothers, some who married because this was a temporary protection for them. Likewise, if a lesbian does not have a current female partner, the question is raised, is she really a lesbian? A lesbian without a female partner slips to the default position of heterosexual. In the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, lesbians are put in Block 13, which is reserved for LGBT people, a group that is not necessarily safe for lesbians. Lesbians are routinely abused and suffer persecution within the camp. This resembles what happens to lesbians who are in prison. Christine, a Ugandan lesbian, was not only tortured by the guards, but raped by other prisoners. So when we come to Australia, a lesbian refugee wanting to gain asylum in Australia faces a difficult path. There are an enormous number of hurdles, among them endless documentation of the abuse and trauma a lesbian has suffered at the hands of family, community, religious groups, police and government. Some governments do not have an arm's length distance between those assessing the claims for refugee status and those enforcing the criminal laws against lesbians. The result is that lesbian claimants are vulnerable to punishment in the country from which they are attempting to escape. With a drawn-out bureaucratic system in the country to which she wants to move, her very existence is under constant threat. The legal costs of engaging an immigration lawyer are substantial, thousands of dollars, and each applicant needs letters of support that confirm the importance of this applicant's need for asylum. The word lesbian is not mentioned once by the Australian government in its recent 9th periodic report to CEDAW of January 2025. If the meaningless word gender identity is used, how can lesbians with a woman-to-woman sexual orientation be protected under law or gain entry into Australia when seeking asylum as lesbian refugees? Members of the Coalition of Black Activist Lesbians, that's COLE, a tiny unfunded organisation, are currently engaged in trying to assist 2 lesbians wanting asylum in Australia. We are told that the waiting period is likely 6 years before a decision is made. Guidelines for officials interviewing lesbian refugees. Some women might be persecuted because of their association with or under threat, but if they're lesbians, their level of risk may be increased. It should not be assumed that a married woman cannot be a lesbian. In some countries, marriage is the first level of protection a lesbian might seek. Lesbians seeking asylum are likely to be politically active, but even lesbians who are not politically active come under threat in some countries. Do not assume that because a woman does not use the word lesbian to describe herself, that she is not a lesbian. It may have been too dangerous for too long for her to be able to speak the word lesbian or the equivalent in her language out loud. Or the word may be so insulting in her own language that she does not want to use it. Do not assume that because there is no word for lesbian in any particular language, that there are therefore no lesbians in that society or linguistic group. Do not assume that if a woman comes from a country where it's not illegal to be a lesbian, that she is therefore not able to claim having been tortured or in danger of torture or other external harm to herself. Do not assume that your interpreter is open to her experience. The interpreter may be hostile to her claim. Lesbians who've been tortured will find it difficult to speak of their experience. Speaking to a stranger is difficult. Speaking to a strange man might be impossible. Uniformed men may precipitate reliving the experience of torture. As a result of torture, some lesbians may be unable to relate their experience at all, or might appear detached and emotionless. This should not be read as evidence of fabrication. Lesbians who are refugees might also be in danger from their families, in particular from the men in her families. Her confidential interview should not be shared by asking questions about her sexual orientation of other family members. So, in conclusion, if violence against lesbians is a matter of indifference and lesbians remain outside the scope of social justice reform, then everyone's civil and political rights remain in jeopardy. The most difficult political reforms to make are, in the long run, the most important because they give us a clue as to the limits of our preparedness to live an ethical existence. If we are unable to be concerned for the lives and well-being of those who are most different, then we're incapable of defending justice for all, even at the most basic level, that involving freedom of association and freedom to love. I would suggest that when lesbians become victims of attack, they are a signal. They are the canaries in the mine. And if the perpetrators get away with it, then other attacks will follow. So we need to be protesting every attack on lesbians because this is a sign of hatred in the social system. If lesbians are not protected, then people who don't fit some other social dimension will not be safe from attack either. Keep your lesbian sister safe and watch the effect it has on society. And these are all the various references that I've referred to in my talk. And finally, I'd like to thank everybody in the Coalition of Activist Lesbians for their responses and suggestions to this presentation. And that includes Vivian Morrigan and Deborah Staines and Barbara Clark, who all had suggestions. And my other co-presenters at last week's session, Sam Paul and Jan Rivers of Lava and Anna of Feminist Legal Unit. And I'd also like to say thank you to Consuelo Rivera Fuentes for friendship and to lesbians facing the bureaucratic hurdles of seeking asylum. Sadly, Consuelo died a few years back. Thanks to lesbians around the world who continue to resist the horrors of violence and to fight for those whose lives have been directly affected by violence. So thank you, everybody, for coming to that.
Thank you, Susan. A difficult, sobering listen, but so important. So thank you very much for bringing that to us. And now I'd like to hand over to Anna Kerr.
Thanks, Janet, and I'll just share my screen. Is that working okay, Janet? Oops.
Yep, that's great.
Okay, thanks. So this is the same talk I gave at the same session as Susan last Saturday. So I think most of you know Feminist Legal Clinic is an unfunded community legal service based in Sydney, which is operated entirely by volunteer effort. We were established in 2017, and much of our work has started off really with a lot of domestic violence advocacy work, for which we did have some legal aid funding at that stage, as well as cases in discrimination law. And the City of Sydney Council was originally very supportive, provided us with a free office and also money for a launch. And all was going well for several years until this event that we held in 2020, where we launched Women's Declaration International in Australia as the Australian country contact. And you can see some of the speakers here. And that event was at Sydney University, hosted by Bronwyn Winter. But anyhow, I don't know, some of you might even recall the event. And of course, we had some protesters. And here's a picture of the protesters storming the auditorium. And they snatched the microphone from our speakers. And you can see they've got a sign there saying homophobes fuck off, which kind of ironic considering that they've just taken the microphone from some lesbian women who were speaking, and continued to rant and rave until the police were called, and then they took off and stole some of our brochures on the way out. And now, following that incident, we were contacted by the City of Sydney Council staff who were concerned. They'd received a complaint. We later found, of course, that the complaint was from the gender clinic from Eloise Brooke. Some of you might be familiar with his work. And how they were concerned that some of our activity, they were concerned about our activity for women's sex-based rights movement, that we were told that we'd have to stop doing that. And they were also concerned about the material that we post on a regular basis on our news blog, our news digest, which is just news reports generally, but which they felt had the potential to offend members of the trans community. And this, I hope you can see, I don't know whether you can see the full cartoon. This is a cartoon by Stella Perrott, and that was among the material that was cited as grounds for terminating our tenancy, which eventually there was a process, and many women wrote opposing it and supporting our clinic. In fact, hundreds of women wrote, and there were petitions with hundreds of signatures, and none of that made any difference. One short email from Eloise Brooks from the Gender Centre was far more effective than hundreds of women writing individual letters. That none of that made any difference to the City of Sydney, and we were evicted. Well, our tenancy was terminated. So despite all this, we've continued with our work in exile, as Janet likes to say. We're in exile, but we continue to work from home and support women who are also battling this. And of course, the heading of this talk was that lesbians are fighting back in Australia or Australasia, and indeed they are. And I'm sure those listening are familiar with the current case taking place, Lesbian Action Group versus the Australian Human Rights Commission. And there's currently a federal court appeal in progress in respect to this matter. So the Lesbian Action Group had, of course, originally requested an exemption from the Sex Discrimination Act so that they could exclude men and heterosexual women from their events. However, it was determined that while it would be acceptable for them to exclude heterosexual women and males generally, no exemption could be granted for them to exclude those males who identify as trans women, as that was considered that that would offend the gender identity provisions of the Sex Discrimination Act. So we took the original decision on appeal to the Administrative Review Tribunal, and they unfortunately upheld the decision. I saw someone in the chat talking about that decision and looking for a copy of it. I put a link in the chat where you can access it, as well as a whole lot of other documents that were tendered in that case. A lot of them are available through our website. And as I say, now the case is on appeal to the Federal Court. And the women are represented by Lee Howard of the Bar. Feminist Legal Clinic isn't involved any further, but the matter is progressing through the Federal Court. And I'm sure some of you probably know more about it because I think it's just been mentioned again in the Federal Court, maybe on Friday. But I won't be discussing that in any detail, obviously, because it is a case before the court. But it's not the only case, or the only effort that has been made by lesbian women to push back against this. Some of you would be familiar with the previous cases of Jessica Hoyle, who she brought a case against the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commissioner on similar grounds. She again wanted to have a lesbian event in Launceston where she wanted to just exclude all males, including those who claimed to be women. But she was unsuccessful. The Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commissioner refused her that exemption. We took it on appeal to the Tasmanian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and sadly we were unsuccessful at that level as well. And although Jessica herself was desperate to take the matter to the High Court, or to the court system generally, everyone always goes straight to the High Court in their minds, but it's a very, very slow and onerous process, and also one that is fraught with risk for anyone who brings these cases through the court system, because there's always the risk of a cost order against you personally if you bring this kind of litigation, not so much at the tribunal level, but once you reach the court system, the risks are greater. And there's also, significant filing fees and disbursements, even if your lawyers are acting pro bono, as we were. So there's a lot of reasons why a lot of these cases are not pursued, and that doesn't mean that they don't have merit. It's just, this is the reality of our legal system. So Yeah, so many women are keen to bring these cases, but they don't necessarily get legal advice beforehand. And so they may, for instance, commence proceedings in their own name without having incorporated an association, which is always a good idea, because if you are thinking you might take litigation further, it's a good idea to have an incorporated body with limited liability rather than exposing yourself to risk. I mean, unless you're in the position of actually having absolutely no assets or no income, in which case you're the ideal litigant. But if you have something to lose, kind of unwise to start the process without having had a bit of advice about that. So it is, if you want to fight back, it's important to be prepared and equipped to last the distance. And that means not only having some funding for disbursements and like filing fees, which can be actually really quite substantial, but also obviously having an appropriate legal team with the necessary expertise, advice about incorporation where appropriate, and advice about the general legal prospects of the case, because running ill-advised cases is not ideal for achieving law reform. However, admittedly, the accompanying publicity that we've had for some of these cases is useful in terms of raising public awareness of the issue, which I think in itself is important. But it's worth keeping in mind that those promoting gender ideology are very strategic with the cases they bring in terms of choosing which litigants, they will use to progress a particular cause. And that's probably a reflection of their greater access to legal advice and to also campaign strategists, because they seem to think these things through very carefully. And that's why we now have a case history going back 30 years of cases which have acknowledged that sex can be changed, and all these things which now we now are trying to push back against. It's very difficult because of the amount of case law that's been established. Of course, some cases are not planned by women but are thrust upon them. So, for example, Jessica Hoyle was shopping in a department store wearing her LGB Tasmania hat and shirt and having a pleasant enough conversation with a fellow shopper who recognised her and shared her concerns. And a member of staff overheard the conversation and asked Jessica to leave the store, basically for being a TERF. So this is clearly, I would say, a case of discrimination in the provision of goods and services. And in Tasmania, there's protections for political opinion and activity. And so we brought a claim to the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, and then after that to the tribunal, but both determined that being a TERF does not constitute a political opinion or activity. So unfortunately, again, the matter wasn't taken further, and which is a great pity, because I think the decision was wrong. But this is the difficulty that you face, that if you're not in a position to go further through the court system, that then sits there and is then referred to by other decision makers. Not ideal. So this quote, I do not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the deaf your right to say it. It's typically attributed to Voltaire, but it was in fact his female biographer, Evelyn Beatrice Hall, who summarised his position with these words. She, by the way, had to use a male pseudonym. She found it necessary to use a male pseudonym to write. Anyhow, I digress, but this principle of defending people's right to say something that you don't agree with, well, that seems to have been completely lost on our human rights commissions. It just really demonstrates how flimsy discrimination protections are. So not only because they seem to be at the moment prioritising the rights of individuals who identify as trans over the rights of lesbians and over women's rights generally, but they absolutely failed to protect political opinions and activities and freedom of speech. Unless what you're saying has the approval of the commissioner, those protections apparently don't apply. That seems to be the impression I have, and I've seen that not only in relation to that case of Jessica Hoyle, but also in relation to the whistleblower protections, which are meant to protect people who want to blow the whistle on things that are happening if they're working, for instance, in a government department, and there are things happening which they think constitutes malfeasance or maladministration, or the wrong thing is being done. That people are meant to be able to, expose that without risking their own employment if they go through a particular procedure. But anyhow, my experience with trying to pursue that with a few of our clients who come to us saying, look, I want to expose what's happening here on the front of, the women's rights being compromised in various ways. The trouble is the Ombudsman, who oversees those whistleblower protections, they've also had the training from ACON, and they don't regard those whistleblowers as attracting the protection of the whistleblower legislation. So there is a real shortcoming in that legislation. So certainly this fight is as much about freedom of speech and freedom of association as it is about women's sex-based rights. And freedom of speech and freedom of association are not the only casualties of gender identity ideology. There's also the lives of countless young women and girls that are being harmed by the fraudulent sex change industry. So in 2022, Jay Langadinas commenced proceedings in Sydney against her doctors for the harm she suffered as a result of masculinizing hormones and for undergoing a mastectomy and hysterectomy. She's, of course, not alone. Many other women are in similar distressing circumstances, but there are still very difficult barriers to commencing personal injury litigation. Finding firms willing to run this litigation is at the moment still difficult. Normally, personal injury firms will run these cases on a no-win, no, you don't have to pay any fees, no win, no fee basis. But because of the very contentious nature of these cases, it's still early days, and there's a certain reluctance among firms to start bringing these cases. There's also difficulties in terms of time limits. Often there's quite a lot of psychological hurdles for these young women to overcome before they're ready to go and see a solicitor, and all of this causes delay, and so we then run into those difficulties with time limits. It's also finding expert witnesses, the doctors that you need to provide opinions to support these cases can be quite difficult in this current environment, where any medical practitioner who speaks out on this issue has their professional qualifications threatened. Frankly, they get complaints against them. So that's all very difficult. There's a picture of a couple of other women who are rare, really, in being willing to speak out about their experiences. Again, I'll say as detransitioners, although we all know that's not really an adequate word, since there's no such thing as transition. But I think we all know what we're talking about until someone comes up with a better word for it. So yeah, it's good to see a few women starting to speak out about their experiences. We hope with time that will embolden more to speak out. But at the moment, it is very frightening for people who've had these experiences, because it results in even more social isolation, as the community that they were within then will reject them very, very harshly. So that's a big hurdle for them. Look, the other thing to say is that lesbians, although it's been really obvious over the last decade, this has become a really big issue. Around the time we Feminist Legal Clinic set up, it started being a very large issue. But in fact, this battle has been going on for decades, as the lesbian women in particular know more than anyone, I think, because they have been fighting these battles for many decades. So some of the earlier battles that women have told me about included the battle over the lesbian project space in Lesbian Space Project in Redfern, think that was in the 1990s. And then there was, of course, the cancellation of LesFest in 2003, 2004. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And also Sappho's Party case, which was in 2006, 2009. And no doubt there's many others that I don't know if there's many others, but I've no doubt there's other cases that I'm not aware of. There were also many, many submissions being written by lesbian women over a long period. And we were interested to come across a very lengthy submission, 15,000 words by Irinya's Autonomous Activist Lesbians. That was sent in 2010 to the Australian Human Rights Commission. It's an excellent submission, but clearly it fell on deaf ears. The silencing of lesbian voices and the erasure of this history of opposition is really significant because it allows the gender identity movement to masquerade as if they are some sort of progressive human rights movement, and that the only opposition is from, bigoted conservatives. So it's very important that we keep talking about this history and how much lesbian women have been fighting back and have received really very little credit for all that effort. Just to touch on those couple of cases, cancellation of LesFest. So this is a picture here of Sally Goldner, who was a founder of Transgender Victoria and took the organisers of the Lesbian Festival, or LesFest, in 2004. She took them to the Victorian Equal Opportunity Commission for advertising that the forthcoming festival was for lesbians born female only. Now, since doing that, of course, unfortunately, the lesbian women managed originally to get an exemption, but it was then overturned. And so faced with, again, the threat of litigation and all that involves, LesFest 2004 was officially cancelled. I think maybe a private party took place, but LesFest was cancelled and has been since then. So Sally Goldner was actually successful in undermining the rights of lesbian women to meet, and has since received all sorts of accolades. I think some of them are listed there, including an Order of Australia in 2019. So this is all very hard to witness, very difficult. However, I'm pleased to say that women haven't given up. The fight continues because some of the original women who were involved in that are the ones who are now bringing the current Lesbian Action Group case in the federal court. And so I find impressive that women haven't given up, that we're still fighting. And I think there needs to be recognition of the fact that it's not all about winning. It's about keeping up the fight and not giving up the struggle. We have to just keep going, even though it's, of course, at the moment we're in a very dark place when it comes to women's rights. We have had some successes, and I should mention that the case of Sappho's Party, the South Australian case of O'Keefe, was the complainant. There's a picture of him there. He is a psychotherapist, but the lesbian women did win that case, which is wonderful. However, having spoken to some of them, the process of the litigation took a terrible toll on them. So it's true that the legal process itself is a punishment, and it's always lengthier and more onerous than people expect. And I think that is no doubt at least partly intentional to deter the faint-hearted. But despite that, lesbian women are continuing to fight on, and hopefully will continue to do so despite all the many obstacles and difficulties. Thank you. That's my talk.
Thank you, Anna. I love that talk. It's so inspiring. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I'd like to thank our speakers, Andrea Marion, Susan Hawthorne, Anna Kerr. Thank you so much for speaking and bringing us such a marvellously varied panel. I really loved it. So I'm looking forward to questions. I'm just going to stop the recording